make a choice, and then wait for confirmation of that choice. Let me give you an example, and I think this actually kind of leads into what we'll talk about in this third moment, things that are going on at the level of the heart. But a friend of mine in Milwaukee, where I live now, she gave me permission to share this. It was just, she told me this story, I was like, that is exactly what St. Ignatius was talking about. So she's finishing up a degree as a physician assistant. Over the past couple of years, been really seriously discerning between religious life or possibly being married. What's made it even more interesting is that, you know, she was kind of really open to both. She was looking at some different religious communities. But then just a couple of months ago, she met this guy, re-met this guy from high school when she went back to her hometown. She was like, just randomly, we, you know, in a way that was kind of odd that we just ran into each other, had a really good conversation. He had had some deeper conversion to the faith that she had in college. And really hit it off. She's like, now I don't know what to do. Like, you know, she like was really like, this is a great guy, you know. All of a sudden, this kind of marriage option that was out there was like, you know, I mean, she just saw him again, but she's like, well, potentially, you know. So she was in this real kind of moment of going back and forth, her heart being moved. And she was trying to decide, just not a big vocational thing, but just to decide whether to go for a couple months to one of these religious communities she was looking at to spend some more extensive time of discernment. And they were saying to her, well, you know, come and, you know, consider, we'd love to have you. She was kind of feeling leaning toward it, but then there was this guy that they were starting this friendship again. And she said, you know, I'm just going to make a decision. She was tired of dealing with it. Just one night, she was sitting in her car when she got home from school, and she said, I'm going to go. I'm going to go for these 3 months and do this discernment thing with this community. Boom. She said, and then immediately, I burst into tears. Like, immediately, she started crying. And not like, oh, consoling, yes, this is my life. Like, she was upset, you know. She said, by the next morning, she said, I knew that is not what I need to do. Isn't that interesting? But what she did was, I don't know, she wasn't really directly applying this, but we've had those experiences. I'm going to make a decision. But what she did wisely was, she didn't just say, no, I made the decision, I'm going to stick with it. What she did was, she waited for confirmation, and it did not come. Right? It was the exact opposite. Her heart was telling her no, you know, and God was leading her in a different direction. We wound up talking about a lot more. The decision she made, she definitely came to a lot of peace with. There was a confirmation of it. So that confirmation, I think, is a key thing, especially in this way of making a decision. Okay, third. Let's move on. The third moment, I would just call discern the spirits. I love doing these talks at Theology on Tap, by the way, because there's various spirits to discern over there as well. But anyway, St. Ignatius is talking to different spirits, obviously. He says this is a moment when it's the exact opposite of the moment of tranquility. It's when we're trying to make a decision and our hearts are all over the place. There's consolation, then there's desolation. We're being pulled back and forth. Oftentimes, this can go along with, this kind of time of discernment goes along with just the reality in the spiritual life of spiritual warfare, of the evil spirit, of the Holy Spirit kind of getting at us in different ways and just working on us, right? What's interesting is when we go through those moments of struggle, I think oftentimes we can think, people come to me and they'll say, I'm just struggling, I don't know what to decide, I'm feeling these temptations, I'm having this consolation, desolation, I'm up and down. Actually, St. Ignatius says, great, you're in a great place because there's so much material to work with. Like your heart is moving, right? Let's work with this. Let's see how God is talking to you in the midst of this. Just a word on this. I would imagine, I don't know in this crowd, you know, where people are with this, but I think it's important to say, when it comes to the spiritual exercises, there's no doubt when Ignatius talks about discernment of spirits, he's not just talking at like a psychological level. He was a great psychologist, I think, which is a lot about emotion and our own thoughts, but he really is talking about, like, there's a Holy Spirit, and there's also evil spirits that are trying to get at us. But here's the name that he gives. I love this. The name that he gives for the devil, Satan, the evil spirit is, he uses it time and time again, the enemy of human nature. He calls him the enemy of human nature, and oftentimes he just shorts it to the enemy. What does that say? It says that the evil spirit is the one who's the enemy of, for all of us in general, who we're supposed to be. The fullness of our humanity, who God has created us to be. He's the one who doesn't want that to be fulfilled. And for each of us individually, it means for you and for me, for all of us, that the enemy is the one who tries to get in and block us from choosing that goal, right? To praise, reverence, and serve God and to serve others with our lives. Like he's the one who wants to block that. So when it comes to decision making, he's not neutral. The Holy Spirit's not neutral, nor is the enemy neutral. And so St. Ignatius came up with this list of, he has them at different moments when you're doing a 30-day retreat, kind of comes up at different times, but I'll share one of them tonight. that he calls discernment of spirits, rules for discernment of spirits. Here's the way that the enemy will try to get at us. Here's the way that the Holy Spirit works with us. It's from his own experience. It's from his talking with people that he knew. And it's remarkable as we look at these, you can really pick up. When I first saw them, I was like, wow, that just describes so many moments of my own life. You see this connection between us and the saints, that they dealt with the very same things that we dealt with. Okay, so here's one very brief example. He has like, I don't know, there's like 30 different rules for discernment of spirits probably in the spiritual exercises. On the retreat that we're doing, we'll do more. For tonight, time's running up, so I'm going to do just one of them. I'm actually going to read from the spiritual exercises to start. You've had enough of me. Here's St. Ignatius' own words. Okay, so he uses an analogy. And I love this analogy. It's a little bit complicated. He is a Jesuit, so follow along though. It's really beautiful. I call it the water, the stone, and the sponge analogy for the ways in which the evil spirit and the Holy Spirit work with us. And we'll come to eventually the way that this can tie into decision making in particular, although in general in the spiritual life it's just a really good thing to know. Here's St. Ignatius' words. In the case of those who are going from good to better, okay, already it requires a little bit of explanation. What he means here is for people, I think basically for us. I mean, I think most of us probably here are trying to live our Christian life, trying to live as Catholics, some of us, probably most of us. We're trying to go from the good things that we're doing to better. We struggle with sin in our lives, of course, yes, but we're kind of making progress in the spiritual life. That's one way to talk about it. In the case of those going from good to better, he says, the good angel, here you could read the Holy Spirit, touches the soul gently, lightly, and sweetly. And here's the analogy, like a drop of water going onto a sponge. For those of us trying to do God's will, not perfectly, but trying, making progress, right? The way that the Holy Spirit tends to work with us, it's like the Holy Spirit is the water, the Spirit is the water, and our hearts are like the sponge, boom, it soaks in. Lightly, sweetly, right? Sometimes, you might say, unless we pay attention, not even noticing it, right? The Holy Spirit's just working in us, very gently, with consolation, you might say. On the other hand, the evil spirit, the enemy, touches the soul sharply, with noise, with disturbance, like a drop of water falling onto a stone. Right, so you think of the drop of water falling onto a sponge, soaking in, the drop of water falling onto a stone, boom, and splattering. And then he says this. He says, in the case of those who are going from bad to worse, all right, so it gets a little bit more complicated here. Those who are going from bad to worse, here in another place in the spiritual exercises, he says, you know, for those who are going basically from one serious sin to the other, who aren't making progress in the spiritual life. And I think some of us probably have been through those times in our lives, and so this could make some sense as well. And maybe at certain times now, when the Holy Spirit needs to get our attention, here's what happens. He says, in this case, the spirits touch the souls in the opposite manner. Right? In other words, for those who are going from bad to worse, the Holy Spirit's going to fall in that person's soul like the drop of water on the stone. Right? Trying to get in, trying to get attention, like banging on the door, like the hound of heaven. Right? Whereas the evil spirit, and here's what's really, this is kind of chilling actually, where the evil spirit is going to fall in like a drop of water in the sponge and just soak right in. Listen to the rest of what he says. The reason for this is that the fact that the disposition of the soul is either similar to or different from the respective spirits who are entering. Depends what kind of soul we have, who we let in. When the soul is different, they will enter with perceptible noise and are quickly noticed. Right? Whether it's for the person who needs conversion, the Holy Spirit is noticed. Boom, I'm trying to get your attention. Right? Or for those of us who are making progress, the evil spirit trying to get at us, making noise, making disturbance. When the soul is similar, they enter silently, like those who go into their own house by an open door. And I like that. He just adds that other little analogy there in the end. And I like that. If the whole stone and sponge thing isn't doing it for you, think of this analogy instead. I think of it like, let's go with most of us, right? Going from one good thing to the next, we're trying to make progress. When the evil spirit's trying to get at us, something that we can tell in our lives is when there's disturbance, right? When we're upset, when there's desolation, right? It's like somebody trying to get into a house and is trying to like bang down, well, they got the camera there, trying to bang down the door, right? Right? Doesn't have access. He's trying to get in. He's disturbing us. Whereas the Holy Spirit, I have this image. It's like husband and wife, spouses, and maybe the wife was out late, and the husband's watching the kids. He goes to bed. It's late. She's coming in from some meeting or something. Well, when she comes home, what does she do? She's like, well, the kids are asleep. My husband's asleep. She has the key. She opens the door quietly. And she comes in. He's in bed sleeping. She comes. She gets under the covers, and he kind of like, he might just go like, oh, yeah. He falls right back to sleep, right? It's like someone entering into their own house like a spouse. Isn't that the way that the Holy Spirit deals with us often? And we have to be attentive to it, to notice it when the Holy Spirit's working. Oftentimes the enemy can get in and can really cause a lot of disturbance and get a lot of our attention. The Holy Spirit's entering in quietly with consolation. I think it's a great thing to remember in the spiritual life in general, but it's also helpful in decision making. For this reason, that the Holy Spirit is like, the way that the Holy Spirit guides us in making these decisions is like kind of like a familiar song, right? It's something that we've heard before. We say, yeah, that's the way, that's that song that I heard that just, I can just pick it right up. I know the words. The Holy Spirit's worked with me like in this way before. And here's where these general guidelines, really all of this is supposed to be done in a conversation with a spiritual director and an individual, or among friends who know each other. Right? Because the way that this works for all of us is completely unique. I mean, the general principles are the same, but what is that song for me? It's going to be different than that song is for you, the way that the Holy Spirit talks to you. Let me give another practical example. This is kind of some of the theoretical stuff. But again, friends of mine who made a decision, I think that they probably didn't even know about this rule for discernment of spirits, but I think it really exemplifies it. This is a buddy of mine from college and his wife. He was my college roommate senior year. He and his wife got married soon after we graduated from school. And just to give you a little bit of background on them, they're both very creative people. My buddy, he's a poet, quite good. He's been a high school teacher since we graduated from college. He is the classics department at a public school. He's the Latin teacher, right? His wife did a degree in fine arts, metalworking. She actually made me this ring that I'm wearing for my ordination, metalworker. And jeweler. So they're both very artistic people. They got married pretty young, right after school. They've got 5 kids now. The oldest is my goddaughter. I was actually just visiting them this past week in Pennsylvania. And so, they kind of, right out of school, they got married, started having kids, doing their work. He's got the job, been a teacher for all this time, kind of doing the responsible thing, which is good. But at a certain point, just a couple of years ago, this would have been about a year and a half, well, 2 years ago, when they started thinking about this, he was just kind of restless. And he was like, I want to go further with my art, with my poetry. And he thought about doing an MFA. And he found this Masters of Fine Arts. And he found this program. They live in Pennsylvania. It's in Sewanee, Tennessee, the University of the South, where, in particular for teachers, they can go and they can take a 6-week program over the course of, I think it's 4 years, take courses and do this Masters in Fine Arts over 4 different summers. So he said to his wife, why don't we take the kids to Tennessee for the summer, for 4 summers in a row, and I can do this MFA. Now, a lot of people would think, and maybe she did originally too, were like, are you crazy? What, with all these kids, and just, they've lived in the same place in Pennsylvania since we graduated from school. So initially they were thinking well, I don't know, maybe that is a little crazy to just kind of set it aside. But here's what happened, kind of in their relationship and in their life. Whenever they kind of started thinking about well, maybe this is a possibility, in particular for him, of being able to grow as an artist in his poetry, just good things happened. When they thought about that, it was like a familiar song. It was like God seemed to be kind of entering in, like the spouse kind of just slipping into bed, right beside, the husband or wife. It was gentle. There was consolation there. It was like water on a sponge, just kind of soaking in. And whenever they started thinking about, well, no, practically the house is going to work, and the kids, and moving away, and whenever they started thinking, no, maybe we should put it off, it was like the water on a rock. Disturbance, temptations, struggles in their relationship. Boom. They were so clear. They were like, I think God's telling us to do this. It's kind of funny because although they've been doing this responsible thing, they're both kind of like bohemians at heart.